certainly set the tone for today. And as we move on into our next section, we are going to be inspired by the panelists that are coming up today. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Angela Nijard. She is the Programs Manager at the Polycultural Immigrant and Community Services, and she will be moderating today's Collective Impact Plenary Session. Welcome, Angela.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to be introducing Collective Impact, a model for collaborative and community change. So what is that, you might ask? So collective impact has become increasingly popular in recent years as a model for collectivity, addressing complex issues. Collective impact enables a group of organizations to address a major challenge by working towards a common agenda. And that's very important, that common agenda. That fundamentally changes population level outcomes in community. Our three knowledgeable speakers today will present on collective impact from different perspectives. Ryan Conway, come on up. He will introduce the concept of CI and speak about what it is, how it's set up, how it differs from other community organizational strategies. Brian Conway, I got confused there. Brian Conway? Ryan Conway. Brian, please come up. So Brian is going to tell us more about the funding available through through Ontario Trillium Foundation Collective Impact Initiatives. And last but not least, in her presentation, City and Y2K, A Tale of Two Cities, I love that name, Stoney McCart will share about a concrete collective impact project that is currently underway in Toronto. And then we're going to have some time for Q&A and for table discussion. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about each of our wonderful presenters here. So Ryan Conway, can you please put up your hand? Okay, thank you. Joined the JW McConnell Family Foundation team in early 2014 and currently works as the manager for special initiatives for Innoweave. In this capacity, he works directly with coaches, content developers, and community organizations and not-for-profits who take part in Innoweave webinars, workshops, and the coaching granting process. He also leads the work of Innoweave on key projects such as Youth CI, that's working on youth collective impact in Ontario, and Seniors SI, working on seniors social isolation. That's pretty awesome. Prior to joining the foundation, Ryan worked for 4 years at the Public Policy Forum, most recently serving as a project lead for major national projects on pension reform, agricultural policy, Canada EU cooperation, and innovation policy. He's also worked for the Government of Canada, and he's an honors graduate from the University of Ottawa Political Science Program, not project. Okay. Okay, Brian Conway. There's Brian. He's a program manager for the Ontario Trillium Foundation's Toronto Community Investments Program. The Ontario Trillium Foundation is an agency of the Ontario Ministry of Tourism, Culture and Sport. The Foundation's mission is to build healthy and vibrant communities throughout Ontario by strengthening the capacity of the voluntary sector through investments in community-based initiatives. Brian's work at OTF has involved liaising with organizations in the social services, environmental arts and culture, and sports and recreation sectors. He recently completed a secondment with the Foundation's Finance Department as a Quality Assurance Specialist. Stoney McCart is the Executive Director of the Students' Commission of Canada and the Director of the Centre of Excellence for Youth Engagement. The Students' Commission has been facilitating the development of the City project That's the collective impact for Toronto youth, as well as the development of the Kingston Youth Strategy, which is also exploring a collective impact approach to the implementation of the youth-generated strategy. So, we're going to turn it over to our wonderful panelists.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for the invitation to come down here, and thank you very much for the opportunity to meet my alter ego. Very excited about that. We'll do a rendition of Who's On First. So my name is Ryan Conway. I'm the Manager of Special Initiatives with the Innoweave program of the J.W. McConnell Family Foundation, and that's a lot of words, right? So we'll break it down a little bit. How many people have heard of Innoweave before? Yes, good. I know a few organizations in the room have worked with us. Did Stoney put up her hand? Yes, she's done it. All right. How many have heard of the J.W. McConnell Family Foundation before? Okay. And how many have heard of the idea of collective impact before? Outside the title of today. Yeah, okay, great. So we'll go over a couple of those things, and then it's my job to sort of introduce the idea of collective impact, or at least the way that collective impact is thought about in the Innoweave program of J.W. McConnell Family Foundation. So, McConnell Family Foundation, I'm just going to call it McConnell because it's a really long name. McConnell is a 75-year-old family foundation. We're based out of Montreal. We fund in issues that are related to creating a more inclusive and resilient Canada. It's basically the broad mandate of the foundation. That's led us in the last few years to be funding a lot in the area of what we call social innovation. And social innovation is a term that can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. It can be interpreted a lot of different ways. But essentially what it is new and different ways of doing things to have a stronger, more impactful social sector in Canada through community groups, nonprofits, charities, etc. The Innoweave initiative of the J.W. McConnell Family Foundation was started about 3.5 years ago now. And it was founded as an opportunity for McConnell and some other partners, including SIGs and provincial governments, the federal government, etc., to create ways to build some capacity in the social sector to be able to use social innovation approaches, as they like to call them. So one of those social innovation approaches that has fallen under this umbrella of the Innoweave initiative is what we call collective impact. But there are a few others, and I'm going to start with sort of where collective impact fits into this whole realm of impact and social innovation and everything like that. We have two concepts up here, one called intended impact, the other is called theory of change. We're going to come back to these as to how they relate to collective impact, but essentially these are, what are you going to do and how are you going to do it? These are sort of the key concepts on which everything that Innoweave does is founded. If you're looking as an organization to figure out how are we going to determine what we do, how are we going to align around our impact and create that theory of change, then Innoweave has a support module that we call the Impact and Strategic Clarity module to work on that issue. If you're going to be looking at, well, we already know what our impact is and we want to have a way to grow it, well, then there's a bunch of other support modules that Innoweave has that can be looked at, like scaling impact, like the social enterprise approach, which I'm sure some people have heard of, and the collective impact approach, which is about a very particular type of growing your impact, and it's growing your impact to reach a population level outcome. And I'll come back to that later. And finally, Innoweave also offers what we call the developmental evaluation module, and this is just a process of developmental evaluation on new or ongoing initiatives. These are all the different categories under which Innoweave support falls. The support that we offer is pretty tailored to a bunch of different situations, but generally starts with informational sessions, then you go into sort of a workshop session with the organization and your board, then you go into what we call a coaching relationship, and this is a relationship where an expert comes into the organization, works with you over sort of a 3 to 6 month, maybe a year basis to help embed that social innovation. And then finally we have the stage, of course, we're a grant maker, of granting and helping organizations actually get to that next level of full intended impact. So I'm going to focus today specifically on our collective impact module. More specifically, I'm actually just going to talk about the collective impact process. To kick that off, I have a little play here that I like to call Everybody Loves Collective Impact. All right? Everybody loves collective impact, right? It sounds great. We're going to come together. We're going to do amazing things together. The world will be all sunshine and rainbows. So collective work leads to some exciting new approaches, leads to better results and outcomes, right? That's the basic idea of collective impact. That's what a lot of people have sort of heard of in the space. And if you've heard of collective impact, as was mentioned as we were being introduced, it's getting to be a lot more popular, right? It's getting to be one of these terms that gets tossed around a little bit more. Maybe it's becoming a little bit like the word social innovation, and that it means everything to everyone at all times. So we have to take a little bit of a more concerted approach in determining what do we really mean when we say collective impact. Often, when we talk about collective impact, people talk about the 5 conditions of collective impact. How many have heard of these? Yeah, a few people around them. These are the 5 conditions of collective impact as determined by a couple of researchers out of the United States called Conway and Kramer. And in the Stanford Social Innovation Review, they published this article 5 years ago now that was sort of like, hey, this is what collective impact is and this is how it works. And it included a lot of interesting conditions, like that common agenda, like working on mutually reinforcing activities, like shared measurement, like having a backbone organization and things like that. These were the conditions that they went and they essentially did research on existing collaboratives, right? They went out and found the existing collaboratives that were working and sort of found what were those common elements, and these were the things that they had in mind. There's also a bunch of other things that come into the collective impact conversation, like new resources, like examining the root causes and things like that, and other appealing elements that are thrown in there, like we're going to solve the big problem, or we're going to use our resources better, or things like that. These are all the things that sort of come into play, or we found come into play, as you're talking about collective impact. But if we're not careful, doing these things and focusing on these process elements can overshadow your actual ability to achieve what you're using collective impact to achieve, which is a bigger, more substantial population level outcome. End of play. So when we talk about what our focus is in collective impact for Innoweave, we're talking at that population level outcome. So in a lot of the collective impact work that we do, we're talking about a rate. Like the rate of youth unemployment is twice in this city what it should be, let's get it down to the average. Or the rate of homelessness is 3 times what it should be at the provincial average, let's eliminate homelessness. That's what we're talking about when we're getting to collective impact. And when you start to think in those terms, you can see it becomes a very, very large, very, very substantial piece of work that needs to be done. And starting off in it can be a little bit of a daunting process. One step down from collective impact is what we call the integration of activities for certain specific outcomes. And these are things where you're looking at, okay, well, we want to serve 100 people or 1,000 people or 5,000 people or something like that. They're absolutely positive outcomes. They're absolutely things that you perhaps need to work together and collaborate in order to do. But they're not at that level of changing a particular rate. So in order to do them, you might not actually need to use the full collective impact approach. There could be other ways that you're achieving them. And then down at the bottom here, we have sort of some of these other activities that often go along in the collaboration space, right? This is another one of the things, everybody loves collaboration because it's a good thing. But when we're talking about community engagement, or running events together, or co-promoting things and everything like that, these are positive steps as well, but they're not aligned towards a population level impact. And collective impact is about getting you to be able to use those activities and use those processes to be able to achieve a population level outcome. So this is what Innoweave likes to refer to as our revised model of collective impact. Now I should say here, this is just how Innoweave interprets the 5 conditions of collective impact. This is based on our experience. We've worked with a few hundred collaboratives across the country. We've done a lot of work here in Ontario, particularly in the youth sector, and working with senior serving organizations. Stoney will be able to tell you what a joy it is to work with us on collective impact as we get to her presentation. But this is the model of how we interpret those 5 conditions of collective impact, and particularly the sequence that you need to be able to go through in order to build a collective impact initiative from the ground up. Because as I was saying before, when the 5 conditions were developed, they were looking at successful collaboratives, right? Here's a successful collaborative that's already up and running, what do they have? But there's not a lot of research out there, despite the fact that it's a popular term, on how much needs to be done at the beginning and what sequence do you do things in. So step number 1, priority number 1, as we call it in the collective impact space, is defining your population level outcome goal, right? This is essentially setting your common agenda, but it's a big first step. It's a very, very important thing. It's determining what is the rate we are going to change, who are we going to serve, what's our population, when are we going to do things by, and things like that. So it's priority number 1. Now it looks like it's only 1 step, but that can take a really long time and an extensive amount of effort. Stoney, we'll talk to this. Our priority number 2. Our priority number 2 is what we call the clear and integrated model of how things are going to be achieved. And this is essentially a collaborative theory of change. How are we going to integrate our activities? How are we going to actually make that population level outcome? And that's a big, extensive process as well. And then once you have those two things defined, then you look at the other elements of collective impact and how they can be serving that model and that outcome goal. So how do we arrange our backbone functions, our communication, and our measurement in order to align with what we're wanting to do? So we have actually 3 programs up and running nationally on collective impact through Innoweave. One is just our normal collective impact module, as we call it. And this is the standard module that's available through Innoweave. It's coaching, it's grants, it's workshops, and things like that for collaboratives that want to start up and get going. We then have 2 special initiatives that are run out of Toronto that focus on specific subsets within the collective impact space. One is called Youth CI, and it's working for positive outcomes for youth in Ontario using the collective impact approach. Partnered with Laidlaw and the Government of Ontario Ministry of Children and Youth Services on that particular program. And our other is what we call Seniors SI, which is working on reducing social isolation for seniors using the collective impact approach. And there are some organizations here in the room that are engaged in that process as well. And both of these utilize sort of that same standard process of there's a lot of coaching, there's a lot of workshops, there's grants to help you along the way and things like that, but with the very specific focus of supporting and developing these collective impact pieces. I'm going to very quickly go over one example because Stony has better ones. That show sort of what you get as you're coming out of a collective impact process. And this is actually a midstream theory of change from a collaborative that's operating through UCI that's working on creating a change in youth homelessness in their community. So this is from a collaborative that had been working for about a year and had spent some time working with the coach. They've continued to evolve and iterate and develop this particular theory of change, but it gives you a very good example of the sort of things that you need to be thinking about integrating and working together on as you're talking about collective impact from a collaborative perspective. So homelessness prevention, the integrated system of care, and the increased range of housing options are kind of like the 3 levers that they determined they needed to pull in order to create their population level goal, which as you can see is ending youth homelessness by 2020. No, sorry, 20% by 2020. And then they have a whole bunch of other activities that need to fall into that theory of change in order to make those things. They've identified their outcomes in the short term, the medium term, the long term, everything that aligns across this process to be able to get to determining what is their current state and what do they want their future state to be. So this is a very particular, just sort of quick and dirty overview of what collective impact is from the Innoweave perspective. But I will say it's our perspective on collective impact. It's important to remember that. There's certainly others. There's a lot of research out there. This is simply how we operate it through our program, our different programs on collective impact. And that it's very, very important to keep the impact part of collective impact in your mind, right? Collaboration for collaboration's sake is not going to serve a population level outcome if that's what you're working towards. So if you're working together in a collective impact process, it's because you need to work together to achieve things that cannot be achieved in isolation. And so if you're interested in working with Innoweave or the programs that are related to it in order to work on some of those impact levels and the collaborative theory of change, I'm more than happy to chat with anybody, but Brian and Stony are going to get the opportunity to learn a little bit more about how this actually plays out in real life as opposed to the theory of these elements.
Brian Conway, please come up. Program Manager for the Ontario Trillium Foundation.
Well, good morning. I'm pleased to be here. And actually, it's an interesting panel, and there'll be a lot of, I think, similarities and some slight differences, but generally, I think a lot of alignment between the 3 presentations. So what I'll do today, just a brief overview of the Ontario Trillium Foundation's granting framework, our different streams, and what is our current definition of collective impact. Just to let you know, this is a field that is really new and it is evolving, and Ryan spoke about this being an iterative field, and definitely I think that as we learn more, we will evolve our understanding of collective impact. I'll talk a little bit about the stages of investment that the foundation is looking at, the types of investments that we can make at different stages of the CI process, collective impact process. Some of the early stage investments that the foundation has made to date. and how you can learn more about the Ontario Trillium Foundation's approach to collective impact. Now, who has heard of the Ontario Trillium Foundation? Okay, just about everybody. Well, the foundation's been around a long time. We're an agency of the Ontario Ministry of Tourism, Culture and Sport, and our mission is building a healthier and more vibrant Ontario. And so the foundation, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about what we're looking to do with our granting strategy, but we are, last year we adopted 8 action areas, and these are the things that we want to do as a foundation to improve the lives of Ontarians. And we have 12 priority outcomes. And so everything we do is about advancing these priority outcomes. And they range from getting more people physically active in Ontario to better quality programming and infrastructure for Ontarians to experience culture, heritage, and the arts, to people in Ontario reducing their impacts on the environment. So if you've got a project you're looking at, see if there's a fit with one of our action areas and priority outcomes. So we do have 4 granting streams or investment streams. And a lot of the calls we got about collective impact, it was really clear to us right away, oh, we have a seed grant program for that, or a capital grant, or a grow grant. So our seed grants are for starting projects at the idea stage, testing out new things. Our grow grants, if you've got a proven model that you know works and you want to grow it or scale it up or replicate it in a different community, that's our grow grants. And capital grants, those are for things like equipment and renovations, creating better community spaces. And the newest aspect of our investment strategy is collective impact. Ryan, it's funny, at Starbucks, whenever I say my name is Brian, they write Ryan on the cup. And then when I saw Ryan's name, who I hadn't met before, I said, oh, they've got my name wrong again, so it's very confusing. Anyway, so Ryan mentioned Kania and Kramer, the authors of the 2010 article on collective impact, and that really is our starting point in terms of a definition. And it's about a commitment of a group of important actors from different sectors to a common agenda for solving a specific social problem using a structured form of collaboration. So it doesn't describe all collaboratives or all coalitions or all networks. It's a specific methodology for addressing a complex social issue. And everything I'm presenting is on our website. There's more detail on the slides than I can get to today, but everything is there, tons of information. So when we talk about collective impact from the perspective of the Ontario Trillium Foundation, we're talking about complex social problems. And problems where past efforts haven't been successful, where different things have been tried out by organizations without a great deal of impact on the complex social problem, and where communities believe that there's a need to bring together stakeholders from different sectors, from different types of organizations together to come to a way of finding a solution to whatever that complex social problem is. So Ryan talked about the 5 conditions for a successful collective impact approach, and these are the 5 conditions that the foundation is looking at when we review collective impact ideas. So it is about a common agenda, shared measurement, mutually reinforcing activities, that continuous communication, and a backbone infrastructure. So backbone, that's a hard word. Backbone infrastructure, that's about a coordinating body, some dedicated person or team that's going to keep everybody in the collective on track. Interesting, I was looking at some of the recent literature on collective impact, and a lot of people are talking about equity, an equity lens as a 6th condition, so that's kind of an interesting thing to look at as well. So now we're going to get technical, but I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail. So in terms of the steps, right now we're looking at supporting collective impact initiatives at varying steps, and the foundation is focused on the earlier stages of collective impact. And here you've got some of the steps along the journey. We talk about groundwork, and that's the initial stage where groups are talking about ideas, looking at the potential for collaboration, the potential for developing a shared agenda. And then we talk about building the case, and that's getting more focused around convening, building the thought process around the collaboration, around the collective, looking at why haven't past proposals or projects worked, and moving on from there. And then concept design is really getting into the more concrete aspects of developing the collaborative and the proposal. And then the actual proposal development is putting together the very detailed proposal to the foundation, and if funded, would be implemented. And then the evaluation and learning process. I'm just gonna get some water. Sorry. The dollar amounts available really differ depending on the stage. And so far, the grants that, or investments that the foundation has made to support collective impact have all been all $20,000 or under. So smaller grants to support the stages of groundwork and build the case. Now, as this evolves and projects move through the stages of implementation, the foundation could make grants as large as $500,000 per year for 5 years. So potentially these could end up being very large grants. Gonna skip this. Okay. So our collective impact grants to date, again, these are early stage investments, $20,000 or less, and this is all on our website, and there's 8 of them. I'll just mention 2 or 3 just to give you an idea of the scope. So one was to the corporation of the municipality of Central Elgin. So that's in Elgin County, which is kind of near London, Ontario. And their goal is to increase physical activity. So what they're seeing as the problem is, and this is their perspective, that people in the region are very sedentary. They're sitting in front of their computer screens, and there's not a lot of physical activity. So they're looking at how to address this, looking at access issues, affordability, transportation, recreation and sport, facilities and programming. So that's, again, early stage. Another one, Freshwater Future Canada, is looking at the problems of Lake Erie, water quality in Lake Erie. This is related to pollution, industrial and agricultural contaminants. Ooh, okay, 5 minutes. And so they're bringing people together, key stakeholders, concerned about the future of Lake Erie. Another example in Halton, closer to Toronto, the Halton Poverty Roundtable is bringing together key stakeholders to look at ways to reduce poverty in Halton. That's like Burlington, Oakville area. And looking at the community benefits agreements as an approach. So community benefits agreements, that's really an interesting area. People aren't aware of that, but that's about how do we get institutions or governments that are making investments to ensure that local communities benefit. So Metrolinx, I believe, was the first community benefits agreement in the Greater Toronto Area. Anyway, those are just a few examples. There is a lot of information on our website. So what you can find there. So I mentioned the 6 action area. Or themes that the foundation has for its work, and we have a video on each action area and a backgrounder. And for collective impact, there's quite a detailed document that explores this topic and talks about the Foundation's approach, the different stages and how much funding could be allocated in terms of each of the stages. And you can also see what we call it a request form now, but you can think of it as an application form. What would the application form look like for each of the stages? So again, it's a lot of information. But the Foundation does see collective impact as potentially a very exciting methodology that could create real improvements in quality of life in Ontario. So I hope that wasn't too much of an overload, but everything is on our website, and we really encourage people to take a look at the opportunities that might exist, either in our collective impact granting stream or under our seed, capital, or grow stream. So thank you.
Okay, I'm hoping everyone's writing down their questions because we want to have a really vibrant discussion afterwards. We'll have a chance for you to ask your questions and discuss. So now I'd like to call upon Stony McCart. You've got the floor.
Well, thank you. Great to see you. I know some people in the room. I'm going to flip back and forth between two cities that we've been working with collective impact collaboration because it's been a really fascinating journey in terms of the differences in different ways, and I hope those two very practical examples will spark both questions and interest and assure you that I think both speakers have already said this, there's a model out there and there's a theory, but there's no real defined pathway that any one group or collaboration has to take. And there are some processes and learning, but this is it's a new idea, but I think as you experience it, at least it's been our experience, you also find that some of the very old practical things that you've been doing for years can slide in here very nicely and really help sharpen up the process. The Collective Impact for Toronto Youth, or City as we call it, project actually began in a very different way than the Kingston project. So I think it illustrates this work that both Ryan and Brian have been talking about in terms of that initial stuff. When we got together, it was a meeting in June 2012 that convened a group of people just in case they were interested in looking at the idea of collective impact. So we didn't have a common agenda, we didn't have a complex social problem. We were all there in that room because we were interested in something new and potentially a new way of working and exploring, and we were there to explore an idea. One of the really interesting things when we brought together a group from across Toronto to talk about collaboration and working together was a sense of distrust in that room. And it was huge and it was palpable, and the whole agenda for the day actually fell apart by noon. So I don't want to set that out, but do expect to bump into those kinds of barriers, and do expect that not everybody is going to come along on the journey. Do expect that you can start in 2012 and be in 2016 at a stage where you're just beginning to think that you've really figured out how this group of people who has stayed with the process, who've remained kind of committed to some kind of idea, and over time have developed enough trust and enough respect for each other to begin to figure out what a common agenda is. You probably can't read this at all. Again, this is on our website and I can share it, but it's there. We use this as a visual and we keep updating it to keep telling our story in terms of how long it's taken, but what happened at each stage. And as a practical kind of tool, the other thing that we have experienced is the onboarding and the exiting and the onboarding again of various stakeholders throughout the process. So that you have to be prepared to, at least the way we are working, is we are prepared to be very open-ended and dynamic and responsive to what emerges. So we started without an issue. We started with an interest and a commitment to Toronto youth. And even those people who left the room had that commitment. They were leaving because they had a commitment, and this seemed like too long a process, and they wanted to be in action. Those of us who stayed thought, well, we're interested in seeing whether a process can help us get to a better outcome. And that's what we were interested in. It took us a couple of years to even broadly define a kind of common agenda and get to what we thought was a broad common agenda for Toronto youth and talk about the kinds of things that we thought needed to be in place for young people. That included sort of work across 5 dimensions: health, justice, safety, education/employment, and we link those 2 things together for a series of complex reasons and discussions that we can talk about later, and engagement. So, and not surprisingly, I am the director of the Center of Excellence for Youth Engagement, so both community engagement, but youth engagement is a fundamental important principle for the project that we're working on. Once we had those dimensions, we started to talk about what was happening and look at research, identify, look at the issues in these areas. And then in the middle of the process, about the middle of the process, we brought together everybody again in a room very similar to this at 519 Church. We had small groups and tables that looked at the statistics and the research that we had gathered for each one of those dimensions. We looked at how we thought what the most important critical things that were happening based on those statistics were in each of those dimensions. We did group work, we prioritized among the group work, we let groups set up priorities, and then we gave everybody in the room a clicker and said, okay, so we prioritized, we've got 10 complex social problems or 10 potential areas to focus. Where do you want to focus? And you can imagine after the struggle that we've had, this long journey, the distrust, the coming, the meetings, the discussions, the revisiting things, changing our theory of change again, going back and forth, there's a fair bit of, we'll never get there, we'll never make a decision. We gave everybody a clicker, they voted, up came increased graduation rates for racialized youth. It was a magic moment. The room actually, I mean, people, I don't know, Nation is going to be here later on. We had some particular funding from United Way, from the City of Toronto, from, I think it was City of Toronto and United Way at this stage. Some interest from MCYS in the background. So there had been funders along, and they were waiting to see whether we could really pull this off. Would it happen? The silence in the room when up came, and this whole room had picked something, and it wasn't everybody's first choice, but it was something that everybody said, if I work in health, if I work in safety, if I work in justice, I know that my work impacts how well racialized youth are going to succeed in education and employment. And I can live with this. I can align with this. I can see that my work has something to contribute to this. And if I work in concert with Common Vision, and you saw that slide where, was it Ryan's slide? It was Ryan's slide, where you see these alignment of all of these other things that are happening, like common events, sharing events, working together in a way, talking about shared measurement, collaboration, all kinds of our own activities that we do. If we align them intentionally with a focus, can we collectively make a difference on something that we have picked to focus on? And for us, that's what collective impact has been about. I am at. Yeah, 2 minutes.
No, we're at 7:30 right now.
Okay, awesome. I could do a song and dance then. So that's been our approach in terms of where we're going. Then we put out so what we arrived at then was a model for making this kind of work. We knew we wanted to work at the neighborhood level, that we needed to be close to the issues that there needed to be some synergy around specific neighborhoods. And we also knew that we wanted to work at the citywide system level. So as we looked, we saw that there were some things that were barriers to what was happening in neighborhood levels, and at the population level, there were system changes that needed to be made, but there were also changes at that micro level, at the neighborhood level, that really impacted directly the lives of youth. You'll see in both Ryan and Brian's presentations that sometimes there's a teasing out of those things, and there's a focus in collective impact and looking at population level things. With our theory of change, every time we wrestle and try and take out the system level things, we run into a barrier in terms of getting to those population level things. So we have integrated system level change and integrated pathways of care as part of our way of getting to our intended outcome. And I will say also, in our racialized youth graduation sort of indicator where we want to achieve, and Brian talked about equity emerging. That's where we're at in terms of racialized youth. Not all racialized youth experience the same outcomes in terms of education and graduation rates. So there are some racialized youth that are actually doing much better, depending on your definition of racialized, of course. But you can't look at it in a blanket way. So we are looking to achieve equity in education rates, high school graduation rates, for those racialized groups that are not meeting the equity standard. And as we look, then what we see is we need equity in access to healthcare. We need equity in justice and treatment. We need equity in safety in neighborhoods. We need equity across the board. So equity becomes that lens that we are looking at all kinds of things for. So as we move forward, then we're looking at creating a citywide cluster where neighborhood issues can rise up, and we're looking at creating collective impact projects individually in separate neighborhoods. So we're looking for a collective impact space for Toronto youth that's citywide, that may in time be able to take on other issues, because seems to be a gap in the city. So it may be in time that we're creating a kind of system infrastructure that can take on other issues, because we built that system and we built that structure and we built that trust for that to happen. But right now we're going to focus on doing that by focusing our efforts on one particular issue that has been collaboratively chosen to work on. And then we put out EOIs, expressions of interest, to various neighborhoods, to those who have been along for the journey. Those who had some sense, and we built some relationships, and we asked them to say, would you like to try to establish a collective impact project using this model, using this focus in your neighborhood? Very happy to say that Scarborough and many of the folks in this room are actually the Scarborough Executive Directors Network put in an EOI. We were really excited because, again, for this highlights a process. Here was an existing collaboration willing to take on a focus and intentionally align some efforts around that. That has put us in a really great space, both in Scarborough, and so we're working in Scarborough, we're working in Jane Finch, and we're working also in East Scarborough, in Thorncliffe, Flemington, Victoria Village. So those are the neighborhoods that we're starting on. And then another thing that happens along the journey is you discover all these other wonderful projects that are being coached by McConnell and Trillium that are also working on similar issues. And even listening to the opening remarks this morning, I'm discovering that there's a mapping exercise that has gone on with you folks and your network outlining, and that's one of the things that's on our list of things to do. What we're discovering is there are pockets of work all over the city that one can align around your focus. And you can tap in and you can share your own. So we've done a whole bunch of resources and research around the stats for racialized youth. And we discovered that St. Jamestown has a youth CI project underway to improve the high school graduation rates of young people in St. Jamestown. Well, that's a neighborhood that we don't need to go to. What we need to do is align our efforts. And so it's always looking for those kinds of alignment around your focus and tapping in. So that's how we've done things in Toronto. What's really interesting is in Kingston, what we had was a youth engagement project where we were asked to facilitate youth voice in identifying what Kingston young people needed from their city, what their issues were, and where they were going. Out of that process came a youth-led, youth-generated, youth research, youth engagement strategy that wasn't neat and tidy and didn't fit into any theory of change, but it met their needs. So we had to go back, and out of that, then we invited organizations who were supporting and supplying youth to write the strategy, to become part of the implementation. So in Kingston, we have a really established collaboration that's very excited about the possibilities of collaborating. And we are moving ahead around a strategy that is designed to make Kingston youth-friendly and inclusive. Now, if we look and explore the potential for collective impact, we're weighing the options, like, do we stay with a strategic collaborative? Do we go into a collective impact model? Does going into collective impact force us out of where we were? These are the questions we're now exploring in Kingston. I think where we're going to land is probably that we can use collective impact as approach on a focused population level problem in the city of Kingston that young people identify, but the strategic collaborative part can continue to create opportunities to surface other areas of focus that we can then move forward. So in all of this, I don't think they're either ors. I think there's a really exciting journey, but it's important to be open, transparent, and honest as you embark on that journey, and expect it to be very complex, and expect to be asked always to make the complex very simple when you have to explain it to folks. That's why you see these really dense diagrams that were in the slides in terms of all the research that's behind, and then a very simple circle at the end of the day. So welcome to the circle.
You know, what we've heard from this is, you know, collective impact is very important, and it's also important to engage the community that it impacts, that it is going to impact, so that we do the right actions as a community, engaging the community. So now we're going to move on for the next 10 minutes or so, asking questions to our knowledgeable panelists. Thank you very much for all presenting such great presentations today. So I'm going to bring around the microphone.
Thank you very much for your wonderful presentations and for being here. My name is Kanat Saba. I apologize for my voice, the cold. I work with language training programs for immigrants to Canada, and I see great potential that collective impact has for providing long-term services to immigrants to ensure full integration into the society. As you know, there's a lot of investment going into the initial settlement supports, both at the federal, provincial, and the city level, but we all know that to build really integrated and healthy communities, long-term supports are required. So I see great potential for collective impact here. I have participated in a couple of webinars of the Innoweave done. Thank you very much, and please have more. And in some of the things that I've heard, I'm just trying to kind of connect the dots and what I already heard and what you have presented. So, I've heard the term collective impact for the first time today. I have heard a lot about social impact, social financing, social impact bonds. A lot of what you presented today, I see similarities of the model. So my first question, I have two questions. My first question is it my right understanding, and I apologize for a silly question, that the collective impact model draws on a social impact model, and I would kind of see this as an improvement because it stresses the collaboration. So that's my one question, if that's my right understanding. My second question has to do with funding, financing, because the social impact model brings in a very strong component of the social financing, social impact bonds, and the getting in the private money into the provision of public services. So I'm wondering whether the collective impact model that you are using also kind of assumes the same combination of funding, both public and private. Thank you.
Great. I'll just show it.
What we'll do is you can just stand up and ask your question, and I'll repeat it in the microphone.
Great, thank you very much for the question. So on on sort of just your sort of introduction to your question there, we were talking about seeing some potential definitely within the settlement sector for these things. We absolutely do agree with you. There's, in fact, one local immigration partnership out in British Columbia that is starting their collective impact process with us now. And their outcome that they're working towards is actually an integration-based outcome. And they've chosen a couple of indicators around that, primarily employment. But in order to serve employment, as we're talking about complex issues here, you need language and education and social services and everything like that. So that all factors into the theory of change work that they're going through. But as Stoney's diagram here, illustrates very nicely, it's a long process to get to deciding what your population level outcome is, right? We have it as priority one, and on Stoney's chart here, it's like 2.5 years. So it's definitely a process. The relation of collective impact to other things within the social impact or social innovation space is that collective impact is kind of, as we're saying, it's a model, it's more like a way of working. And some of the other elements like outcomes financing, which is social impact bonds or social financing or social enterprise approaches, these are things that could certainly fall within a collective impact sphere as agents of creating that impact or of supporting it. So we have collective impact initiatives where one of the ways that they want to create change is using a social enterprise, or one of the things that is necessary to support their activities, because they already have outcomes-based activities, is a social impact bond. So there's certainly things that can fall within that. They're not prerequisites or anything like that within the collective impact model. Collective impact is really just that way of looking at the activities in order to achieve the impact. To the second point around financing and do we presume these elements falling within the collective impact approach, we do to a certain extent presume that that the financing is going to be an element that needs to be addressed through the collective impact work. So there's, as I said, there's the opportunities to look at SIBs or social enterprise or things like that. What Innoweave and the collective impact process offers as we're developing is the ability to create these plans and things like that so that you're able to operate on those elements. And we offer sort of more limited amounts of execution funding to actually do it, because our presumption going into this process is a little bit that, as Stoney was saying, some of your existing activities are going to fall within this and you're going to be able to realign and work with them on a little bit better approach. That being said, we're a funder, we're within the social sector space, OTF is as well. This costs money. You'll need foundation support, and so we offer it in certain capacities. And our UCI program, which is uci.ca, which has everything that was on my slides, has the detailing of how we work that in the youth space and things like that. But yes, it's a whole hurricane of different funding stuff that needs to come in. And the last point you mentioned in that second question was private sector. And it's often said that collective impact, you see multi-sectoralism as a component or necessarily a prerequisite. Our opinion in Innoweave is that if you need the private sector to achieve your impact, then you need the private sector in your collaborative. If you don't, then don't bother with it.
Okay, Devon Muke Scarborough Museum. I think this is awesome. This is definitely what I want to get on board with. People don't often think that museums got a lot going on. We do. We have a lot happening, and we'd love to get on the ground floor of this. Is there a space that I can go and be like, whoa, these guys are working on this. Can I jump on board? Or is it just that I got to call on my friends in this room and figure out if we need to do something? So is there a way to get in on something? Or, rather than having to sit down and do it all, like that I can jump on and be like, this fits our mandate, this would be awesome, or just even get in on the discussion?
If you're in the city of Toronto, let's talk after.
Great. That's the best answer I've heard all.
So one more? Yeah?
Thank you all for sharing that. Just out of curiosity, for agencies who may have an interest in collective impact and making a change, what are some of the things have you seen that agencies are not yet ready to take that next step? Has there been a case for that?
Yeah, I guess in terms of the Ontario Trillium Foundation, yeah, many of the calls we got, especially after we first announced the collective impact investment stream, people were calling about things that really weren't collective impact. They really need a new roof or a new executive director, or those are. That was a group wanted to do a succession planning model and felt that would be collective impact, but
So you guys don't have those per se.
so. But I think defining the issues can be really difficult, and thinking through the issue of partners is really a difficult one. The other thing is the question of momentum. So I think Stoney's presentation really illustrated very well that this is a journey. And I think one of the challenges can be day one, there's a lot of buy-in. Day 20, people have forgotten. So I think that challenge of momentum, I'd say that's a huge one.
Yeah, and I think one of the ways we used that visual was every time we have a new meeting or information session, we actually put that mural up. And we have people in the room who were at each one of those stages. Like, we catch everybody up because we do have people coming and going. So I think, and to your earlier question, it is really important. Both these websites that Brian and Ryan have referred to are a wealth of information in terms of how to do it, what you're looking for, but also look for the projects that they're funding. Like, look for those opportunities that have been funded and link and see if you've got a connection. But if you have a burning issue, then look for the partners. So it depends. That was part of my point. Look for where your starting point is. If you're just really interested in thinking that as an agency, this idea of collective impact really resonates with some of the things that you want to achieve, then go looking for people. They define that and go looking for people who agree with you. But otherwise, look for projects that your agency or your personal commitment is really. You say, I would really like to be part of that change.
From sort of an agency perspective, one of the trip-up points that we see is don't think of collective impact as a way to fund a program, right? It's to fund an outcome. It's to create an impact. That's what collective impact is there to do. So one of the things that can trip up your momentum is if your collaborative is a little too focused on, okay, well, I got to support program XYZ, and this might be a way to get some funding to do it. So always have that lens of what is necessary and sufficient to create your outcome as you're going through that process. And that's how you define what you need to do and who needs to be at the table for this process.
So for agencies that are, been trying as a small piece of the puzzle to get to a particular outcome that you can't define or don't have the resources to measure or know what you're doing, then it's appropriate to say this and what we're doing could be really benefit from aligning with others who want this particular outcome. That's one of the real, that's the synergy that you're pulling together on in terms of alone we are struggling to change, high school graduation rates or make sure that young people have access to mental health resources with equity. Who else is wanting to make a very specific change? That's how you're looking for your partners. And so and that's why I think when I talked about the sort of either or, trying to be fluid about this, we're all still struggling with how to present this to make it, but it is that outcome and that energy around the outcome that's really important.
There's another question. And I got a common goal. That's what you need.
Good morning. I'm Serge Paul from the French Public School Board. Most of us here, and maybe I'm mistaken, but we are part of LIP's table. So can you tell me, maybe I didn't understand very well what you said, it was very well done, by the way, but I didn't understand, what is the difference between a collaborative impact and a LIP table?
I'll start by saying, I think every LIP is a little bit different, right? But a LIP can be sort of the pre-existing foundation of a collaborative if you want to be doing a particular collective impact piece. There's a lot already there, and as I said, we've had a LIP that has decided to use a collective impact model and go forward towards a particular population level outcome. But I would say that, as far as I understand, the defining flipping of the switch would be, okay, everybody in this LIP is going to work towards this outcome within 10 years for the people in our area. And that's the specific change we want to make, as opposed to just a steady state of service.
Ryan, and Tony, thank you so much.